Hello and welcome to Deep Learning Leaders. My name is Eric Landau and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Encord, the data development platform for AI teams. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Tom Shapland, co-founder and CEO of Canonical AI, mixed panel for voice AI. Thanks, Tom, for joining today.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. It's great to be here.
So first, before going into Canonical AI, which I'm very excited to chat about, I'm really curious to learn more about your time, another startup which you were co-founder and CEO of, Tulie, which operated in a very different space and was an AI company before the current wave of AI companies. I'm curious, one, understanding like what Tulie was and what the story was for how you started it, how you grew it, and how you eventually sold it as well.
Yeah, and when I was working at Tulie is where we first met. We're both YC founders, and we I was looking more and more into computer vision and reached out to you because I saw what you guys were building and thought it was really cool and could be really helpful. Yeah, so
Yeah.
let me tell you more about the story of Tulie. So I developed a technology during my PhD work at UC Davis, and that technology could measure how much water a farm field was using.
Mm.
I'd always been interested in business. I never wanted to see the technology I was working on, if I could get it to work. I didn't want it to be just a paper that nobody read. I wanted to see it out in the world. So when we figured out this innovation when I was still at school, I started a company shortly after graduating and started trying to see if there's any farmers out here in California that would be interested in buying the product.
Mm.
It was a difficult business for lots of reasons. One of them is that it was a sensor company. It had a hardware component.
Mm.
Like many of your customers, right? You deal with a lot of people that are building hardware in the world.
Yeah.
And it's a lot harder than SaaS. But somehow I found my first group of customers, and that was enough traction to somehow miraculously get into YC. And once they let you in, you have to be a really bad actor for them to kick you out. So I ran with it, and it was just a great journey. I'm gonna pause there and just see where you want to take that story, because I could ramble for hours about my last company, and you should
W-
direct me.
Yeah. So I'm curious because now people understand the power of AI or models or ways in which you can kind of improve business processes or other processes in regular work. But I imagine at the time you started Thule, and especially in the agricultural space, that understanding wasn't there, and there was maybe some skepticism over how well this stuff worked or the impact. How did you navigate around that, and how are you able to sell the product originally, which I can imagine would be quite challenging, at least from a guess.
Yeah, so let me tell you more about our first product line. And it was that first product line and the data feed that we got from that first product line that enabled us to build the computer vision product later on.
Mm.
The first product line was a sensor that we put in the farm field, and it would measure how thirsty the plants were. And because it was a sensor product that we had to put in the farm field, and it's farming is chaotic. There's a lot going on with tractors going through
Mm.
fields and all sorts of things. Occasionally that sensor would break or to get hit by a tractor or something. We'd have to send out a technician. And I've always loved plants, and also it was just an important part of quality control to like know what was going on in the field. So if we had to send out a technician from the early days of the company, we also had that technician take lots of pictures.
Mm.
So we ended up generating this really cool data set that was both pictures of what the plants were looking like and really good data on how thirsty they were.
Mm.
And our sensor business at the time, it grew fast initially, and then growth slowed down, and it was just this profitable business. And I was looking into kind of these new cool computer vision things. And I was like, oh, I wanted a new challenge. Like, let's build a new product in computer vision. What can we do with this data set that we have to bring a new product out in the world? That was really kind of the start of it. I imagine you hear similar stories with your clients, right? That there's like they have this interesting like almost like data exhaust, and then they're like, oh wait a minute, we could build some cool models with this.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's that, and sometimes it's startups that consume the data exhaust of other companies, and they recognize where interesting data sources are and the potential to use those data sources to solve interesting problems. How did you end up operationalizing the kind of computer vision product? Like, were you predicting the thirstiness, or did you find other types of kind of issues that you could solve from a kind of a plant perspective?
The first thing we went after was predicting or I should say, inferring the thirstiness of the plant. So we built a mobile app. So once we trained, the first step was to like see if we could even get enough signal from the pictures to build a accurate enough model. And that's where we first crossed paths. Was I was trying to wrangle this huge data set of pictures with all these labels of how thirsty the plants were, and the data set was, like a lot of data sets that weren't built for the intention of what we were trying to do. There was some weird stuff in that data set that we had to figure out how to make sure we were curating appropriately. So that was the first step. And then once we had a model that worked pretty well, we had really close relationships with the farmers who are our sensor product customers. So we went to them and started talking to them about like how would you want this to work, and we built like a really quick prototype because we felt like we had to give them something to like get the gears turning. So we basically just put the model on a mobile app and just had it every time somebody took a picture, fed it to the model and showed them how thirsty it was, how thirsty the plants were. So they take, excuse me, I said that kind of funny. The people would take a picture of the vine, and it would show the farmer how thirsty the plants were. It ended up being really, a really neat product to work on. It was really fun to work on. It was a way for me to kind of stay up to speed with what was happening in computer vision and AI. And I don't know, the product line, it never became our main product line. It was always a secondary product line compared to the sensor, but it was an important source of revenue for us that I think contributed to the story of why we were a great company and why another company might want to acquire us.
So yeah, it's interesting because the kind of going back to my original question, one of the ways that you were able to do it was you had relationships and you had a business that was already engaged with a lot of these farmers, and so you implicitly built the trust that and gave yourself leeway so that you can ease this AI technology onto them and see, and they could find value. I'm I'm curious, so kind of going through the trajectory of Tulie, how you end up selling it, and then how you end up going into a very, very different space, voice AI after. So what happened after you developed the computer vision product?
Yeah, so just to speak a little more about what you just brought up, the one of the hardest things about building a startup is getting distribution, getting the channel for you to bring your product out into the world. It's especially clear to me with this new startup just how noisy the internet is and how noisy the world is. It's hard to get people's attention. And for that computer vision product we launched at Tulie, we had a market. We had the attention of the California wine grape industry. We had a great brand and people knew about us, so it was really a matter of like, hey, there's this really cool technology. Let's put it in this channel and see if people will find value in it, which was really fun and something I kind of wish I had now. And that like I'm still building my channel out for the voice AI space, and I feel like I'm frequently just out there in the world making as much noise as I can. And I really wish I had that channel that I could take all the cool stuff that my co-founder is building, he's the CTO, and drop it in that channel if I didn't have to work so hard at just building that initial channel.
Yeah,
I don't know. Does that resonate with you? Is that
yeah,
something you
totally.
see?
Yeah, totally. I mean, especially in AI, now everything is kind of blasting. It's all the same volume, and it's really, really difficult to pick out signal from noise. And I think that's a lot of people are just lost in everything that's coming out. It's also coming out so quickly. It's
Hmm.
really difficult for even seasoned veterans in the space to navigate what's going on, and what is worth investing your attention into, and what's not. Uh, and I want to get to that question of like the how to generate sufficient noise and attention in the space. Um, but I'm very curious in how you ended up there, because when we first engaged, you were building the computer vision product, you kind of working in agriculture. You had a great brand and a profitable company, and then we worked together for a bit, and then a few years passed, and I saw, and then you started something in a very new space. So I'm curious, like the gap, and what happened there.
Yeah, so the story of what happened in that period was we built this the computer vision product, and it was really neat. And I feel like, look, I should maybe say it a different way. Um, After we built that computer vision product, it was a really fun part of the journey at that company. Um, but the company also I'd been running it at that point for like 9 years.
Mm.
Um, and I was interested in, I just didn't think I was the person that was going to figure out how to take what we were doing working in agriculture and make it a huge business. I felt like I'd built the company up in the early stages. I raised a seed round, and then we weren't able to raise an A round for kind of some market reasons that I still think were unfortunate. I'm kind of giving you a weird rambling answer. I'm gonna start again, and hopefully you guys can handle this in post
No
processing.
worries.
Um, okay, let me try again. So we built this cool computer vision product, and the company had a great brand in California, and we had all these great customers. Um, and along the way, when you're building a company, you just meet other companies in the space. Sometimes it's because you're actively out there looking to partner with other companies that you think might help you build a better channel, or maybe they have a product that could fit well with yours, and you could both go after a market together. And other times it's just that you meet like-minded people. Like you happen to be at a conference and you meet like, hey, you also were a former academic that is now in ag tech. What's it like? What's your journey been like? And that was the story with how I met my contact at the company that acquired ours. My initial contact was a guy named John Gates, who had been a professor at the University of Nebraska Lincoln. And I also have an academic background. My product was originally it came out of my PhD work. So right away there was an affinity between us. Um, and I was just looking at kind of what my company was doing, and I thought, it's maybe time that I try to find a better home for it. I think a change in leadership is a good thing every once in a while.
Mm.
It brings a fresh perspective and kind of can take things in a new direction. And so I was considering, trying to find a buyer for the company, a new home for the company, and I reached out to John, and they were interested in what we were doing. Um, and it's been really great. CropX has been a really good home for Tulie, for my company.
And then after selling Tule, how did you get into the voice AI world? And yeah, what drew you into it?
So we fell into voice AI by accident, and I'm so glad we fell into this space. It's such a fun space to be in. It feels like a community. It also feels like it's about to grow really fast. Um, the way I fell into it, well, initially, the CTO of my last company, Adrian Cowham, and I wanted to start another company together. We wanted to go on the journey again, and we knew we wanted to work in LLMs. What entrepreneur doesn't right now? Who would start a company not working in that? If you wanted to start a tech business, um, so the first thing we were building was a caching layer to reduce the latency and the cost on LLM applications. the idea behind a caching layer is every time a query would come in, you'd first check that query that the user said to see if somebody has basically said the same thing before, but even if they use different phrasing, if it was the same thing, you could return the answer from a database and not have to call the big, slow, expensive large language model. So with that product, one of the first markets we started targeting was voice AI companies because latency, at least at that time, was so important to voice AI. It still is important, but the industry has come a long way in solving the latency problem. There still can be latency issues, but at the time when we started working on this, at the beginning of this year, so January of 2024, it was a major issue. And in talking to all these voice AI builders about latency, we just got to know the space and meet lots of different people in the space and really enjoyed working in it. And we thought, okay, this is the area where we want to be solving problems in.
For this caching problem of finding semantically similar queries and then using them to pull the response, from some other storage or database, it strikes me as the best way to do that would be with an LLM to verify that the questions are the same. Did I drop out a bit? I think I dropped off a bit. Let me try the question because I'm curious.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for doing caching, and you want to check that the questions are the same, even if the phraseology is different. How do you do that? And this is to avoid using an LLM. How do you do that without using an LLM to match that the two phrases are actually equivalent to each other?
Yeah, it was building the caching layer was really neat. It was a fun problem to work on because it was so tightly constrained. We had to do it fast. We had to do it in a low latency way as possible. So it made for an interesting puzzle. Like every decision we made about okay, a customer's asking for this, how do we incorporate this? It was always against the backdrop of it had to be really fast. And the basics of how it works, there's two things to how it works. First is we couldn't use a language model because they were too slow. We could consider using a smaller language model, but generally those weren't accurate enough for this. So the first step to it was just doing a similarity search. So taking a search in the vector space and looking for we just use cosine similarity to see okay, are these two vectors close enough, related enough that they're a match? And if they are, then it would become a candidate, and then we would do other post-processing on it as fast as possible to see if okay, is it actually a candidate? Is this actually an appropriate response, or is it not actually an appropriate response to return from the cache? A lot of that post-processing was trying to look at the context around what the original query was. So we weren't just passing in what the user said, we were passing in what the assistant said before it and the user said before it, and trying to do that sort of semantic similarity search really fast.
How do you evaluate whether that's working or not? What was the kind of validation mechanism for your caching system?
It was a lot of what people are doing in LLMs right now. There's a lot of manual stuff people are doing, right? They have these manual data sets and they'll try to tweak some, or they have data sets, test data sets, and they'll tweak something and then see if it, dramatically decrease the quality of what they were doing, or hopefully increase the quality. Or in our case, when we were trying to chase down faster and faster performance, we just wanted to make sure we weren't degrading the accuracy with our latest ideas on how to increase performance. So in our case, it was just test data sets. And then, I don't know, we'd release it into the wild and keep our fingers crossed and hope that whatever was happening in the real world where the unpredictable human is doing stuff, that it would continue to perform well.
And how did this evolve into what is now Canonical AI?
So what we're building now is a way for voice AI developers to know what's happening in their calls. If you talk to people who are building voice AI agents, and by voice AI agents, I mean um, something like a dental office assistant, where a patient can call the dental office and they talk to a voice AI that schedules the appointment for them or reschedules the appointment or checks their insurance or whatever. Um, so those are the customers that we work with now. Um, and most people are building these sorts of voice AI agents. If to figure out what's going on in their calls, they're manually listening to a subsample of calls.
Mm.
Um, and or what's actually probably more what I know is more frequent than manually listening to a subsample of calls is they are waiting for customers to complain, and then they are like then listening to the
Checking.
call,
Mhm.
then checking on it. um, and a lot of the eval tools out there for this sort of thing where you have these multi-turn transcripts, they don't work very well. Like evals work pretty good if you have like these little discrete test case, like user says this, assistant says this. But when you're handing in this 7-minute transcript, the
Mm.
LLMs get lost on being able to know like what actually happened in that call, and they're very frequently wrong. So you really have to think carefully about how to address the problem and break the conversation down into stages. Voice AI also has this problem where there's lots of the audio really matters. It's not just the transcript that matters. You can have a transcript that looks okay, but then you listen to the call and you're like, oh man, this went terribly. So you gotta have like both sides of the coin
Mm.
in voice AI. You have to both understand what happened in the content and what happened in the written content, the textual content, and in the audio content. Um, so that was a description of what we're building now, or at least the problem we're solving now. We're helping people figure out what calls to, or I should say it differently. We help voice AI developers get visibility into what's happening in their agents in the wild. Um, the way we got into it is we're building the caching layer, and we just weren't seeing the sort of traction and growth we wanted to see. We had a large user sign up relatively early on, and then kind of a trickle of smaller users. And I kept thinking, like, one more SEO blog post is all it's going to take, and the floodgates are going to open up, and I'm going to get a lot more customers.
Mm-hmm.
One more LinkedIn post, one more Twitter post. And it just wasn't happening. So we went back to, we knew we wanted to stay in voice AI because we loved the space so much. There's so many neat people we were meeting that were building cool stuff. Um, and so we went back to all the people we knew, and we were like, what's the problem you would pay for now? Like, what's the more urgent thing? What's the thing that is holding your business back right now? And they're like, we don't know what's happening in our calls. And so our big customers aren't deploying our voice AI agent because they don't have enough trust in it. We need a better way to know what's happening in our calls and to build trust in the agent and improve the agent.
Mm. And are you, so it's interesting because you mentioned that the audio itself matters, not just the end transcript. And my understanding is that voice AI can be done in a couple different ways. One of them is just the transcription, and then an LM and the transcription, and then back to synthesizing the audio. And OpenAI has the audio to audio API. Does Canonical work on both kind of segments, or how do you evaluate the audio component to it inherently versus just the text?
So there's two parts to our product. The first part is we map the caller journeys. So we take, for every transcript, we break the call into stages. So a call stage, the stages of a call might be greeting, recording consent, appointment scheduling, call conclusion. And we do that for every call that an agent had in a day. And you get this really nice map that shows you, look, developer, 90% of your calls are going like you expected. Things are going well, but
Mm.
this 5% over here are going off the rails in a way that you didn't expect. And you need to change your system prompt, or you need to look into this third-party integration you're doing because however you're making that function call, it's not working enough at the time.
Mm.
Um, so that it's that caller journey map is probably the thing that at least initially resonates the most with our prospects and our customers. But it's really not the whole story. We're also taking the audio recordings and we're running a bunch of different signal processing on it. Things like looking at the sentiment of the caller. That's a pretty straightforward, or not that it's a straightforward problem, but it's a pretty, it's table stakes.
Hmm.
Another thing we're looking at is how much of the call is silence and how much of each person's turn is silence. So is the caller like, is there a lot of silence on the human's part every time it's their turn to speak? There's a lot. It's generally a sign that something's not going well. It's these things that we're basically building metrics around these things that we intuit when you
Yep.
listen to a phone call. You
Mm.
listen to a phone call and you're like, man, that person is not happy with how this call is going. A lot of times it's not because the person said, I am not happy with how this call is going. I want to let the record show I am not happy. Instead, it's things you infer from the tone and the silence and the latency and all these other, and the interruptions. And those are the sorts of other stats that we're surfacing.
And I imagine this works very well in types of calls that have an inherent structure to them. So customer service or support. And I'm curious, one, is that the majority of the use cases that you're seeing? And then two, what are some of the other interesting voice AI applications that people are working on? Like, what are you excited about in the space as well?
Yeah, so right now you're spot on in that our customers are people that have voice AI assistants with an objective, and there's generally a path that they're trying to lead that caller down, or the caller is trying to lead that voice AI agent down a particular path of what their need is, and it's generally things like people calling a business to get something done. Um, when I think about what's happening in voice AI and like why it's such an interesting space and why it's so much fun and why there's so much room for it to grow, I like to think of it in terms of three categories. There's this existing call volume, so there's lots and lots of minutes that happen every year of people calling businesses or businesses calling other businesses, and a lot of that is a good target for LLM-based voice AI applications. And examples of that are like the things we've been talking about, like a dental office receptionist. Another example is like every time you call a home service provider of any kind, that so much of that sort of business is done over the phone. A lot of healthcare work is done over the phone for reasons associated with privacy as well as just legacy technology stuff, legacy cultural things, it seems. Um, so that's the one category of voice AI, existing call volume. Another really interesting category is the sort of call volume that is going to emerge because of this new type of technology. So I think we're going to see a lot of new call volume that's enabled by LLM based voice AI. Um, and one example of that is what you were alluding to when you asked me the question of like, what about like open-ended conversations that don't really have a goal? So you can imagine if you are talking to a character. Right now, a lot of that character type fictional interactions that people have with AIs, they're textual, they're typing with them, but we're seeing more and more of those become multimodal. They're either in voice or they're avatar.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's an interesting example of like, I think we're going to see this explosion of call volume for this new type of calls. And it's going to be entirely LLM based or AI based. And then the third category is voice user interfaces. So I just keep thinking of I have two small children. I have a 6 and 8 year old, and I think by the time they're in middle school, probably even sooner, things go so much faster. It's hard to like predict how hard to reorient ourselves in just how fast things are changing. But they're gonna look back on their childhood and be like, remember when dad used to like furiously tap away at his phone with his thumbs? Like how ridiculous was that? I mean, it's gonna seem like a rotary phone to us. Like
Mm.
it's not gonna be the normal way for it's obviously not the right way to interact with these tiny screens is to
Mm.
furiously tap at them at our phones. And similarly, there's lots of things we do on our laptops where, tapping away with our fingers is probably not the way that humans want to do it that feels most efficient.
Do you think most of the talking that we'll do will actually be to AI systems versus people in the future?
That's really interesting. So I think for existing call volume, for sure, we're mostly going to be talking to AI systems. So for the existing call volume, like when you call a business to see when they're open or whether or not you can change an appointment, that's all, so much of that is going to go to AIs. And there's probably a lot of people listening to this that are skeptical about this because they're like, I effing hate having to call businesses and getting the IVR, and like it never works for me. And it's because we haven't experienced as consumers enough the magic of encountering an LLM based voice AI in the wild, and
Hmm.
it just solves people's problems. I see this all the time in the calls that we analyze for people. Like the human calls and they're like, I want to talk to a representative, not a machine. And then the voice AI says, okay, I'll forward on the call. Just tell me what it's about. And the human says what it's about. And then the voice AI just solves it for them. It's magical. And so I strongly believe a lot of the existing call volume, we're going to be talking to AIs and not humans for. Um, then certainly the second category I went through, the new call volume that's enabled by voice AI, inherently will be talking to AIs. Um, the the when I first heard your question though about like when I'm just talking and going through the world as a human, am I going to be talking to a human or am I going to be talking to an AI? And I don't know how to think about it. I think it's going to depend on what you do. Like so much of my time, it seems like that I'm talking to people. I'm talking to people on Slack,
Hmm.
um, and I'm talking to real people. At least I think they're real people. So uh, it's not always verified. So many of the people I know, I've only met them through the internet. But I don't know. How would you answer that? What do you think is going to happen?
Um, the actions that we do are with technological systems, but they're not framed in the parlance of communication. And even just coding, right? I'm communicating with a computer system, but I'm not talking to it. It's like in this very different type of grammar and
Mhm.
syntax. And maybe what's going to happen is all of the informal communication that we have with systems will just look like the normal communication that we have with humans. So everything will just be talking. And so probably in terms of all my actions, most of what I do is with a computer system right now anyway. I go click on my tab and move my mouse and I go type a thing. And what AI is doing is this bring that form factor to be similar to how we just communicate one on one with each other. And if you think in that terms, then yeah, most of the talking, most of the communication that we'll be doing will be with AI versus with humans. That's one kind of perspective.
Yes, this area of like the voice user interface, I think
Mm.
is going to be really neat to see how that changes and how quickly we'll forget how cumbersome it was the old ways we interacted with computers. Like, I know you're younger than me. I'm not sure if you ever had a phone that used T9 to text, where it
Yeah,
would,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And like as soon as we had like an iPhone where you had a keyboard, you immediately forgot it. You're like, well, that was stupid.
Right.
And I think that's going to be a lot of like, you're right. Most of my day, I'm taking some sort of action on a computer, and right now, most of the time, that's done through my fingertips, not through voice, and it's kind of weird. And when as soon as we have an effective way to move it towards a more human interaction, we're gonna totally forget the old way because it was like that was weird that we had to do it that way.
Yeah, maybe even just having a computer is such a restrictive form factor for a technological system. It'll just be everything. Everything will be talking to it and this kind of more informal, natural communication style. Um, and yeah, voice AI is the. It seems to be the portal, besides chatbots, of course, that is the closest to kind of realizing more humanistic engagement with these systems. And voice is like even a lot more intimate than a chatbot, right? Because it's what we kind of normally interact with other people with. Um, so I wanted to wrap up with a few quick fire questions, but before I do, I remember a presentation that you gave a long time ago in YC, and you said two things which I remembered. One was whenever you do a presentation, people only remember two things, and the second was to repeat yourself. So I'm curious, what are the two things that you want people to remember about Canonical AI?
The two things I would like people to remember from our podcast is like first how much fun it was listening to Tom and Eric talk. They seem like great guys that you might want to get to know.
Naturally.
And then second, that if you're building a voice AI agent of any kind, you need visibility into what's going on, and we're building a platform to help you figure out what's happening with your agent in the wild.
Awesome. So a few quick questions. Um, One, we touched on some of this, but I'm curious, like, what advancements in AI are you the most excited about now?
I'm most excited about voice user interfaces. I think maybe that's the umbrella to a lot of what we've talked about today. Like, I think it's going to very soon seem strange how how we're currently interacting with computer systems, and so much more of it's going to be through voice in a way that feels more normal and doesn't have to be learned in the same way.
Interesting. If you could debunk one myth about AI, what would it be?
Do I have to answer these quickly? What is the I don't know. I don't know what comes to mind there. I think what immediately came to mind is like, I think people think it's hard to get started with AI. Like there's so much hype around it that people are like, not enough people are using it. That's probably it. That's gonna be my answer. The the myth I'm gonna debunk is that it's it's already here and everyone's using it. Actually, out in the world, very few people, a small percentage of people still are using large language models. And it's really surprising to me because my efficiency at getting stuff done has gotten so much faster since I first interacted with ChatGPT. Um, whenever I see someone open up Google, I'm like, what are you doing with that? Put that away. There's a better way to get what you need.
Great. That's perfect. And maybe the last one. What does AGI mean to you?
I think AGI means computer system that it can interact with you in the world much the same way that a human can, with similar capabilities.
Well, thanks, Tom, for the time, and it was really cool hearing your story, both at Tulie and Canonical. And it seems like voice AI is a super exciting nascent field, and I'm really interested to see what happens when a lot of people do start using this, and how this can fundamentally change the way that we operate in the world. And I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, I was really happy to be on your podcast. This was really fun. And I think what you guys are building at Encord with the multimodal curation and annotation is going to be really important for the voice AI world for us to build this future that we're talking about.
Thanks, I appreciate it.